Chapter 24. The streets of old Detroit looked like a battle zone. Small bands of looters smashed store windows and yanked out merchandise, howling like primitive warriors. Emile leaned against a wall on an empty street, smoking a cigarette. He hadn't liked spending a night in jail. Worse yet, he hadn't enjoyed the feeling that he had been put there by a ghost. He had tried to explain exactly what had happened to Clarence. Clarence would have none of it. He thought Emile was having another drug flashback. Emile shrugged. That was possible. OCP had said publicly that this robot cop was their creation. He wasn't a human. He hardly even behaved like one. Yeah, Emile had probably just been seeing things. After all, he had almost been deep-fried at the gas station. He put out his cigarette and lit another, tapping a small foot nervously. Clarence and Leon were late. Emile puffed away, staring at the white van parked a few feet away. Damn it! If he could get here on time in that hunk of shit, why couldn't Clarence? A sudden flash of inspiration lurched through his brain. Swinging his leg up, he kicked the TV shop window behind him, shattering the glass and setting off the alarm. He reached in, yanked out a large ghetto blaster, and turned it on. Funk music echoed down the empty street. Emile began to boogie, the glass crunching beneath his feet. A horn brought him to attention. Clarence and Leon pulled up in Clarence's battered 6000 SUX, a gas guzzler built like a tank. Clarence slid out of the car, 2 grenades hanging off his flak jacket. Leon held a shotgun. He wasn't a happy man. Thanks to Robo's interference at the coke joint, his jaw would be wired shut for quite a few weeks to come. Emile was wearing a prison shirt. He displayed it proudly. Thanks for pulling some strings, Clarence. They even let me keep the shirt. It suits your disposition, Clarence said as Joe pulled up in an immaculate black SUX 6000. Joe climbed out of the car, a butterfly bandage across his shattered nose. Clarence gazed at Joe's wheels. Joe's car was in great shape. Clarence's, the same make, the same year, looked like a rolling slum. Leon saw Clarence's expression and grinned under his wire. Hey Clarence, Joe's got a car just like yours. Not quite like mine, Clarence said. He reached inside the trunk of his car and pulled out a bulky, lethal-looking rifle. A 20mm Cobra assault cannon with video targeting sights. Clarence aimed the gun at Joe's new car. He squeezed off a titanic round. A 20mm hole ripped through the driver's side door. Clarence smiled and fired a second time. He blew away the front end of Joe's car. Joe's recently stolen, spanking new vehicle lurched forward like a dead horse and hissed toward the ground. Clarence flashed a smile at the devastated gang member. Nice car, Joe. Joe was at a loss for words. You're crazy, man. It's part of my charm, Clarence said, yanking 3 more Cobras out of his trunk. He handed one to each of his men. It's party time in old Detroit, Clarence said sweetly. Emile, delighted with the new weapon, spun and fired 3 rounds at an appliance store. The front of the store simply exploded. Toasters and televisions sailed into the street in fragments. Messy, Emile said, suddenly grinning. but I like it." Joe aimed at a fire hydrant and squeezed off a round. The hydrant shattered, sending a gusher of water some 30 feet into the air. "Damn!" he chuckled, firing round after round into the storefronts on the street. Emil cackled and joined in the fun. Explosion after explosion rocked the block. Smoke and debris were everywhere. "Sort of looks like old Beirut, doesn't it?" Joe grinned. Clarence sighed and turned to Leon. They had the attention span of gnats. He pulled out the CompuMap card. The red dot was pulsating. "The Metal Man is in the factory district," Clarence said. Leon nodded. "So? I don't get it. Charity work ain't your style. We have no truck with the hammerhead cop." "Delta City," Clarence said. "That's our reward. We're in on the ground floor of the future, Leon. There's going to be rackets there like in any other town, only bigger, better, more profitable. And we're going to run them." "All for offing the cop?" "Uh-huh," Clarence grinned. "We're on our way up the corporate ladder, my man. The more Delta City prospers, the more briefcase-carrying stooges Unicorp sucks into the complex, the more money we make." "You're a good businessman, Clarence." "I'm a great businessman, Leon." "Aw, geez." "What?" Clarence stared at the map. "The Tin Man is moving. Let's roll!" Joe and Emil were still blowing up the street when Clarence called, "Stop wasting ammo and let's go!" The two chuckling gunmen trotted up to the van. Emil slid behind the wheel, whooping. "And they're off!" he crowed, "for an evening of happy hunting." The van chugged through the smoke and flames caused by their two assault cannons. "The military gets to use this kind of stuff all the time," Joe marveled. "Makes you wish you were more patriotic, don't it?" Emil grinned. The white van disappeared into the night, Clarence following at a discreet distance in his car, Leon at the wheel. All through old Detroit, the world seemed to be coming apart at the seams. Lewis guided the turbo cruiser through hell on Earth. Cars were turned upside down in the streets, ablaze. Looters smashed store windows with pipes, grabbing as much merchandise as they could carry. Robo watched a fat man throw a bus stop bench through the window of a liquor store. "Hey everybody!" he bellowed. "Drinks are on the house!" He wondered to himself how people could do this to each other. The stores they were looting, the property they were destroying, belonged to their neighbors. People not much better off than the looters. "Look out!" Robo exclaimed. Lewis slammed on the brakes as a group of looters darted before her. One carried a television, another struggled with a writhing bundle of fur coats. A third man tried to balance an entire side of beef. "Over there," Robo pointed. Outside a store proclaiming Lee's Sporting Goods, a group of street rabble was growing dangerously rowdy. Looters were running out of the store carrying skis, tennis rackets, baseball bats, and guns. The elderly Chinese owner of the store, Mr. Lee, ran after them, a pistol upraised. He was on the point of hysteria. "Stop, stop! Come back tomorrow! Big sale!" A large man in a plaid shirt, carrying a deer rifle, calmly shot the elderly man in the leg. "I'm busy tomorrow," he rumbled. The gang around him began firing their guns wildly into the air, like kids armed with handfuls of firecrackers. Old Mr. Lee, on the ground, cringed as the bullets ricocheted around him. Lewis brought the car to a stop. Robo, clenching his jaw, emerged from the car. Lewis looked at him, worried. "What are you going to do?" "One thing about a mob you can be sure of," Robo said. "It has no guts." Lewis thought about the remark, shrugged, and grabbing her riot gun, got out of the car as well. Robo walked down the flame-spattered street, his auto-9 drawn. Lewis crouched behind him, behind the turbo cruiser, covering him with her shotgun. Robo stopped 10 feet away from the store, raised his gun, and fired 3 times into the air. "All right, folks," he said in a booming voice. "The party's over. Drop your guns." The mob of looters turned as one and gazed at the lone cop. A dozen held guns. The rest carried TV sets, stereos, scuba equipment, and blenders. One tall kid bounced a basketball casually. The goon in the checkered shirt stepped forward, pointing his rifle at Robo. "Hey, cop," he said, doing some quick calculating. "There are 30 of us and only 2 of you." The crowd yelled in agreement. Robo shrugged and fired. The guy in the checkered shirt clutched his shoulder and collapsed on the ground, whining like an infant. The deer rifle clattered to the pavement. Robo calmly fired 4 more times. The deer rifle spun in a circle as the slugs pinged off its barrel and butt. The crowd gasped. Several people dropped their guns. A basketball bounced harmlessly down the street. Robo stared at the mob. "Anybody else have anything to say?" The mob stood transfixed. The fat man who gutted the bar staggered down the street, holding a bottle. "Hey!" he exclaimed. "You shot that guy!" Robo adjusted his voice to public address mode and proclaimed loudly, "Go back to your homes! Lock your doors and stay there! Do it now!" He faced the drunk. "You got a problem, bozo?" The drunk dropped the bottle. "Me? Just pointing out a fact, that's all. Really, I was just going anyhow." The crowd began to disperse. Robo watched them leave. At the far end of the street, a white van slowed to a stop. Lewis glanced over her shoulder. She wondered where she had seen it before. She continued to cover Robo. Something within her made her glance back at the van. The back of the van slid open and Joe emerged, holding one of the massive Cobra ACs. Lewis remembered the face. It was the goon from the factory. The pisser. "Murphy, heads up!" she screamed as Joe opened fire. Robo addressed the scattering crowd. "Everybody, hit the dirt!" A volley of explosive rounds screamed through the air and tore up the street. Looters went flying, bleeding through the remnants of the storefronts. People fled, screaming, running, heading for home, through the smoke and the flame. One missile sent a manhole cover flipping into the air like a coin. The guy in the checkered shirt tried to get to his feet. The manhole cover struck him in the forehead. He fell to the street one last time. Robo ran for the turbo cruiser, firing his auto-9 at the van. Joe cackled as he fired several more deadly rounds. A shell narrowly missed Robo's head and smashed into a light pole. The pole shattered, bursting into a maelstrom of shrapnel. The concussion sent Robo sinking to his knees. Lewis had had enough. She jumped in the turbo cruiser, and burning rubber hung a sharp U-turn in the street. Cradling her shotgun in her free hand, she aimed the turbo cruiser directly for the van. Joe froze for a moment as the turbo cruiser two-wheeled in a circle around the van. Lewis squeezed off a round. Joe leaped back inside the van as the shotgun blast shredded part of the back door. Lewis barreled back down the street, screeching to a halt next to Robo. Robo was in the midst of climbing in when Joe reappeared at the van's rear, firing another round. The shell sizzled past the cruiser and took out what was left of the front of Lee's sporting goods shop. The flying debris shattered the windshield of the cruiser. Lewis yelped in pain as several shards of glass sliced into her cheek. "You in?" she gasped. "Yeah," Robo grunted. "Sons of bitches," Lewis muttered, gunning the gas. She sent the cruiser zooming down the street. The van ground gears and took off in pursuit. Lewis held the wheel tightly. Explosions roared to her left and to her right. Robo tossed a new magazine into his auto-9. He was bleeding from a gash in his cheek. He glanced at Lewis. She had an identical cut below her right eye. "You okay?" Robo asked. "Yeah, you?" "I've been worse." "Hey Murphy, what the hell was that?" "A Cobra assault cannon, built by our friends at Omnicon for the Army." "Jeez!" Lewis exclaimed as a battered SUX leaped out of the side street and sped for the cruiser's midsection. Lewis accelerated. Clarence's car clipped the front end of the cruiser with a crunch, sending it spinning along the street like a pinwheel. Leon, at the wheel, let out a war whoop as Clarence cheered him on. "We got 'em! Now let's finish them," Clarence said, lifting a Cobra of his own. Leon charged the police vehicle head on. Inside the patrol vehicle, Lewis fought with the wheel, trying to stay in control. The SUX bore down on them. She threw the car into reverse and pressed the accelerator to the floor. The SUX kept on coming, aimed directly for the front grille of the police car. Lewis, looking over her shoulder, drove backward down a flame-strewn side street. In the SUX, Clarence hoisted his Cobra out of the side window. Robo drew his auto-9 and flipped his senses into targeting mode. He took a deep breath and squeezed off 3 rounds. Clarence and Leon ducked as the windshield before them broke into a spiderweb pattern and collapsed inward. The SUX slowed down, but continued coming. Lewis cursed under her breath. At the far end of the street, directly behind her, the white van pulled up. She had driven right into a classic bookend situation. Joe leaped out of the truck with a Cobra in hand. He dropped to his knees and drew a bead on the zigzagging cruiser. Lewis glanced in her side view mirror. "Hold on!" she barked. She sent the cruiser skidding into a narrow alleyway used for loading and unloading cargo. The SUX barreled right by the alleyway, unable to brake in time. Still driving in reverse, Lewis navigated through the narrow alleyway at a smooth 80 miles per hour. Skidding out onto the next street, she jammed the car into drive and slammed on the gas. She glanced in the rear-view mirror. The white van rounded a corner and sped after them. Joe leaned out the rider's window and fired his Cobra. Explosions once again rocked the cruiser. "We've got company," Lewis said. "With more on the way, no doubt," Robo said, looking over his shoulder. Clarence's SUX skidded around the van, picking up speed. Inside the windshieldless car, Leon squinted his eyes as the 60-mile-per-hour wind ripped through the front seat. Clarence calmly flipped on a pair of sunglasses and balanced his Cobra on the dented dash. He fired a round. The shell sailed over the speeding turbo cruiser's hood and smashed down into its right engine. Robo and Lewis hung on for dear life as the car reeled under the impact. The right rear flamed out. Half of the gauges and readouts on the dash sputtered and disappeared. Lewis slammed a fist down on the fire control button of the steering column. She wiped blood out of her eye. She gripped the wheel, white-knuckling it, pushing the damaged car for all the power it could muster. Warning tones buzzed and panel lights flashed on the functioning sections of the dash. Robo reloaded his Auto 9. It was his last magazine. Lewis barked into the comlink. "I Baker 44. Officers need assistance. Repeat, officers need assistance in Old Detroit." She was greeted by a wall of silence. "God damn it!" she yelled. "Come on! I know you're out there!" Silence. "Great. We're going to lose the car." Robo looked over his shoulder. "We may lose more than that." Leon sent the SUX surging in front of the van. It was now right on the cruiser's tail. Clarence fired the Cobra, once, twice. The shells sailed harmlessly over the cruiser. Lewis maneuvered the car around a corner and over a badly tattered bridge. The SUX and the van sailed over the bridge after them. Lewis skidded around a corner and into an alleyway. At the end of the decaying path stood an imposing 12-foot cyclone fence. Lewis glanced at Robo. Robo nodded. Lewis put the pedal to the metal, coaxing the cruiser to 60 miles per hour. The car bounded down the alleyway, hitting the fence hard. The fence flew apart in several large sections. The turbo cruiser sailed through the remains of an abandoned steel yard. Robo pointed to a decrepit foundry building. The cruiser zipped inside the cavernous building. In the alleyway, the van and the SUX cautiously drove over the remains of the fence. Leon slowed the SUX down. Clarence glanced up at a rusted sign. OK Steelworks. Condemned. No trespassing. Dog on duty. Clarence pointed towards the foundry. The two vehicles cruised to a stop before the building's massive doors. Joe jumped out of the van, gun still in hand. Emil leaped out of the van. "Let's smoke 'em!" Joe smiled, calling into the building. "Hey, boys and girls, the wrecking crew is here." Clarence sighed and got out of his car. These morons could be so childlike at times. He turned to Joe and Emil as Leon stepped out from behind the wheel of the SUX. "Inside, we stick together. Nothing fancy. All you have to do is kill them. Understood? You got it. Emile grinned. Clarence pointed to the van. Get behind the wheel, Emile. You and I will drive in. Joe and Leon will walk point. The four goons entered the towering building. Inside, tiny shafts of moonlight filtered down to the ground from the holes in the roof. The place was huge and dark and damp. The van and the SUX purred slowly through the building. Joe and Leon, carrying their cobras, walked cautiously in the light afforded by the headlights behind them. Joe and Leon stiffened. A noise to the right. Drip, drip, drip. They relaxed and laughed. Rainwater dripping along reddened steel beams. Leon began flicking his tongue against his wired jaw nervously. Somewhere in the distance, a dog was barking. In the SUX, Clarence peered nervously into the rear-view mirror. In the van behind Clarence, Emile lit his third cigarette. Darkness swirled around them. Mist rose from the ground. Joe began walking sideways before the vehicles. Another dog was snarling somewhere. Jesus! Leon exclaimed. Up ahead, behind a mound of debris, two dogs stood like hounds of hell. Their eyes gleamed red in the headlights of the van. A large and powerful Doberman was in the lead. A second mutt, part shepherd, part dinosaur, bared his fangs. Joe aimed his cobra. Fucking dogs! He let a charge fly in the dog's direction. The dogs galloped off before the shell hit, blowing a section of the floor sky high. Smoke cascaded through the foundry. Joe and Leon exchanged hearty laughs. There was nothing like tormenting a lower species to buoy one's spirits. Joe heard some movement behind him. He turned. The Doberman. He raised his gun and fired quickly. The dog's body shattered and fragmented. A plume of smoke rose slowly towards the ceiling. In the distance, the surviving dog howled mournfully. It gave Leon chills. Joe didn't seem to mind. If he met that second critter, he'd turn him into hamburger as well. When the smoke cleared, a voice boomed across the room. Looking for me? Outside a large pair of exit doors, some 30 feet from the building, Robo stood, gun drawn, under a cluster of decaying chemical tanks. The moon shone down from overhead, giving his helmet an eerie, medieval appearance. Clarence's gang hesitated for a moment. Emile lit another cigarette. Leon and Joe exchanged frightened looks. Finally, Clarence leaned out of his car. Get him! He ordered. Before either Leon or Joe could move, the howl of a turbine engine sliced through the air. Clarence stiffened behind the wheel of his car. What the hell was going on here? In the front seat of the van, Emile turned around, not quite believing what he saw. Lewis, in the cruiser, sped directly for the rear of the van. Emile, eyes agog, tried revving the van's engines. It was too late. The cruiser smashed into the back of the truck, hard, lifting the rear in the air. Lewis hit reverse, backed up and, tires squealing, smashed into the van again, tires digging in. Inside, Emile pumped the brakes in panic. The van began to move forward. Emile continued to play with the brakes, gripping the wheel madly. Lewis's car pushed the whining truck out of the building and into the steel yard. Emile didn't know how to handle this. The van was beginning to pick up momentum. Lewis gritted her teeth, wiped the caked blood from under her right eye, and continued to floor the cruiser. Clarence gunned the motor of his SUX, swerving so as not to be hit by the skidding truck behind him. Emile gazed out of the windshield in terror. The van was sliding towards a tank clearly marked "Danger, Toxic Waste." In the cruiser, Lewis kicked in the afterburner and then slammed on the brakes. Emile wrestled with the wheel. There was no controlling the van now. It hit a large oil slick and rammed the tank broadside. 10 yards away, standing clear, Leon and Joe watched mesmerized as the van punched a hole in the tank. There was a dreadfully long second where time itself seemed to have come to a stop. Then a scream. The back of the van blew open, and a small tidal wave of chemicals washed out onto the ground, Emile sputtering within its grasp. Emile writhed on the ground, surrounded by foam. He got to his knees and raised his hands to his face. He grabbed his burning skin. It came off in his hands in large, stringy wads. Emile began to melt, literally, as Joe and Leon decided that the time was right to open up on Robo. Emile ran blindly into the fray. He tumbled into Leon. "Help me! Please!" he screamed. Leon brushed the screaming, melting henchman away from him. "Get the fuck away from me, man! Get the fuck away!" Leon ran for cover, leaving Emile to run, dying slowly, out of the steelyard, into the night. Joe and Leon continued to fire their Cobras at Robo. They were using twist bullets now, deadly slugs that burrowed into their targets before exploding from within. Robo nimbly tilted his body this way and that as the bullets whirled above and beside him. He nudged his vision into targeting mode. He locked onto Clarence. The gang leader had swung his car across the steelyard and was now doubling back towards the cyborg. Sweating behind the wheel of his SUX, Clarence ducked before Robo had the chance to fire. Boddicker slammed his foot down on the gas. He aimed the SUX directly at the cyborg cop. The cumbersome car picked up speed. 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. Robo fired at the zigzagging auto, his slug slamming into the hood, but doing no damage. Clarence screamed with glee as the right front fender slammed into Robocop, sending the officer tumbling onto the ground. The SUX zoomed off across the yard and towards the largest building in the complex, the pressing plant. Lewis, in her turbo cruiser, roared after it. Joe and Leon stumbled across the steelyard, firing at the turbo cruiser. Robocop, dazed, ran toward the pressing plant. He was greeted with a hail of bullets. Robo dove head first and tumbled across the macadam as the ground erupted around him. Calculating where the shots were being fired from, he leaped to his feet and fired 2 rounds 20 degrees to his left. Behind a pile of girders, Leon and Joe hit the dirt as the 2 slugs pinged into the metal. By the time they got back to their feet, Robo had disappeared into the plant. In the massive plant, the SUX weaved between the ancient hot rolling presses and the huge Brobdingnagian girders that supported the sagging ceiling. Lewis, in her cruiser, paced the SUX, shadowing its every move. Behind the wheel, Lewis was getting tired of playing cat and mouse. She floored the one-engined vehicle, smashing into the back of the SUX with a deafening crunch. Clarence cursed, spinning the wheel, twisting and turning the body of the car away from the cruiser. Lewis braked slightly, allowing the SUX to surge ahead. She fed the cruiser gas once more and came up alongside the large car. She cut the wheel hard to the right, slamming into the side of Clarence's car with a thud. The screech of metal on metal echoed through the cavernous plant as Lewis forced Clarence's car off on a sharp angle towards a large rolling press. Clarence pulled further to the right, disconnecting his car from the cruiser. He reached across the seat for his mighty Cobra. Lewis smashed into his car from behind again. The SUX lurched. Clarence, cradling the gun in his left arm, stuck the muzzle out of the window. He was about to fire it at Lewis when he glimpsed something running towards his car. He gaped at the apparition before him. It was a monster. He blinked. No, it was the moving, shriveling skeleton that had once been Emile. Emile staggered towards the car, the few remnants of his flesh hanging in large strips from his body. His muscle and tissue were exposed. His mouth was no more than a yawning hole in the center of a wad of semi-solid matter that had once been a face. Emile opened the hole in his face wide, a gaping silent scream. The SUX smashed into him, hard. Parts of Emile flew into the front of the car. Clarence wrestled with the wheel. The large car smashed into the side of a rolling press and began to spin, totally out of control, through the plant. Clarence fought to regain control and remove the bits of steaming, chemically tainted flesh from his flak jacket. He didn't see the girder until it was too late. The SUX crunched into a massive support beam, twisted, and began to roll the length of the floor. It picked up speed as it went. It hit a second beam and crumpled into a V shape. The car landed upright. Clarence was slumped at the wheel. His head rested on the car horn. The SUX, looking like a 2,000-pound accordion, emitted a staccato beep. Lewis slowed her cruiser to a halt. She glanced at the ground in front of the car. Clarence's Cobra AC lay on the ground near his battered vehicle. There was a human hand wrapped around the barrel. Emile's hand. Lewis slowly got out of the car and approached the SUX. Clarence was still behind the wheel. Smoke began to ooze from under the hood. Lewis kicked the Cobra aside. She approached the front door. Clarence was bleeding from the forehead. She eased the door open. Clarence lurched to life. Before Lewis had time to back away, Boudica pulled a .45 and fired 3 rounds. Lewis flew back through the air, violently, blood spurting from her chest, her side, and her leg. "You're dead meat, cop!" Lewis heard from above. Landing on her back, writhing in pain, she stared at the ceiling. Joe and Leon were roaming the catwalks above. Leon stood in a glass operations booth. "And now for the final act," Leon announced, flicking a switch. The lights in the plant went on. Lewis winced as the stark white light bathed her sweating flesh in a blinding glow. She began to shake. Everything hurt at once. She knew it was bad. Very, very bad. "How about a little target practice?" Joe chortled, smiling down at the bullet-riddled form of Anne Lewis. A bullet sizzled by his head. "Sounds fine with me," came a loud growl. The 2 men looked down on the ground. Robo, gun drawn, was charging full tilt across the floor of the plant. Clarence, spotting the cyborg, climbed stiffly out of his car and made a move for his fallen Cobra AC. Robo fired from the hip. Clarence screamed and went down on his knees. Coughing, he staggered to his feet. "Better living through science," he cackled. A flattened bullet fell to the ground off his flak jacket. Clarence ran off past the bleeding Lewis. Robo made a move to fire at the fleeing killer. The ground around him exploded. Joe was firing from the catwalk. Robo hit the ground, rolling, returning fire all the while. Robo rolled up next to Lewis. Twist bullets tore into the ground around them. "Hang on, partner," Robo whispered. As gently as possible, Robo pulled the bleeding policewoman behind the wrecked SUX. They'd be safe there for a few seconds. The bullets stopped sizzling. Robo could hear footsteps above him. He realized that Joe and Leon were jockeying around for a clear shot. He dismissed them for the moment. He gazed down at the ashen face of the woman. He cradled her head in his cold steel hands. He touched her soft, white cheek with his left thumb. Tears were flowing from her eyes. "It hurts, Murphy." "I know." Robo nodded. He gazed tenderly at her. She seemed to have the face of a sweet, dying child. Her body stiffened, then relaxed. She closed her eyes. She made no further effort to speak. "Lewis," Robo called. "Anne." The woman did not move. Robo heard the footsteps above him grow louder. He gently laid Lewis's head down on the concrete. "I'll be right back." Robo broke cover and ran the length of the plant. Above him, Joe fired until his magazine was spent. Still running, Robo flipped himself into combat mode. He glanced at the catwalk above him. A complex schematic analysis of Joe's position raced across his mind's eye. Robo ducked behind a steel support girder. Joe, now reloaded, sent another volley of deadly twist bullets in Robo's direction. The bullets slammed into the mighty girder, making it flex and shake. Robo crouched, taking it. A sudden thought occurred to him. Joe was firing from in front of Robo. But where was Leon? Robo spun around in time to see Leon fire a twist round from the control booth, far behind and above Robo. Robo had 0.03 of a second to hit the ground before the bullet smacked into its intended target, Robo's skull. The twist bullets smacked into the steel pylon some 3 inches from Robo's head. A slice of the girder blew out, causing the entire beam to buckle. Robo was unable to roll for cover as the girder and large chunks of the steel roof collapsed down on him in one gigantic pile. On the catwalk, Joe glanced across the overhead mazeway at Leon. "You got him! You son of a gun, you got him!" "Maybe," Leon said, looking through the video rangefinder on his Cobra. "If I did, I'm gonna finish him off now." Leon peered through the sights. He slowly scanned the rubble far below. Twisted steel, concrete slabs, bits of roofing. A hand. Robo's hand. Leon panned upward along the length of an arm. He locked onto the back of Robo's head. This was going to be easy. This was going to be fun. "Hold your fire!" called Clarence from below. Leon did as he was told. Clarence appeared at the entrance to the building. "I promised someone I'd take care of the Tin Man personally." "Shit," Leon hissed. "This is gonna take forever." Clarence slowly and stiffly walked across the building. He walked past the battered SUX. Behind the car, Lewis's hand quivered. She slowly flexed her fingers. She slid them across her face. She opened her eyes. The nerve endings throughout her body were on fire. Pain washed through her in great rippling waves. She could hear herself wheezing. Punctured lung, probably. She seemed to be hissing, losing air, losing blood, losing life. Far above her, on the catwalk, she saw Leon lean out of the control booth. She glanced under the car. 5 feet away from her was Clarence's abandoned Cobra. She tried to slide towards it. No use. Everything in her body seemed shattered. She closed her eyes and cried. She was in pain, but more than that, she was angry. She had been suckered. She had made a tremendously dumb move, and now she and her partner were going to pay for it with their lives. Clarence continued his march towards the pile of debris. He pulled a grenade off his flak jacket and began bouncing it from hand to hand. He stopped some 20 feet away from the pile. He pulled the pin on the grenade. In the rubble, Robo slowly turned his head to see Clarence illuminated by the bright white ceiling lights. He spotted the explosive in the maniac's hand. Clarence emitted a shrill, whiny laugh. "Sayonara, Robocop!" Clarence tossed the grenade into the debris and backed away. The grenade bounced through the twisted steel and roofing and landed a foot from Robo's face. Robo twisted beneath the mountain of steel, extending his hand towards the grenade. "Everyone say bye-bye." Clarence laughed. Clarence's laughter was short-lived. Emitting a thundering roar, Robo rose up out of the steel scrap heap like a Bronze Age god come to life. He held the grenade aloft triumphantly. He hurled it with expert calculation towards the catwalk above. Joe screamed as the grenade hit the catwalk not 4 inches from his left leg. He turned to run as the explosive detonated. Pounds of catwalk and ounces of Joe fell to the ground as the walkway began to crumble. What was left of Joe clung to the catwalk, clawing desperately for something to hold on to. Joe glanced down at the floor. His left foot was missing. He was spewing blood like a fountain. The catwalk splintered and collapsed, Joe falling with it. Joe landed with a thud on a spiked wall far below. The spike tore through his right leg, leaving him hanging like a rag doll, upside down from the wall. He was in too much shock to scream. But he was still alive, damn it. The robot hadn't killed him. Joe wanted revenge so much he could taste it. He began to writhe, impaled on the spike. In the glass booth, Leon cursed and, raising his Cobra, drew a bead on Robo. "Come on, man," Leon whispered. "Move just a little to the right. Just get away from that girder." Below him, Lewis bit her lower lip, cursed herself for being weak, and rolled over to the abandoned Cobra. Sitting bolt upright, she grabbed it and fired it blind. A sudden stab of pain in her spine caused her to collapse from the recoil. She passed out as high above her, a twist bullet slammed through the floor of the booth and embedded itself in Leon's chest from below. Leon coughed, amazed, as blood began to flow down his leg. He dropped his Cobra, realizing that, in a few milliseconds, the bullet inside him would detonate. The control booth shot across the roof level in 1,000 pieces of glass, plastic, and flesh. Across the plant, Joe heard the crunch of solid debris hitting the ground and the sickening thuds made by the falling body parts that had once been his partner in crime. Leon's death stirred something in Joe. "Goddamn lady cop!" he hissed, still impaled on the spike. Grabbing the spike, he slowly pulled himself up onto the top of the wall. He lifted his mangled leg off the point and lowered himself to the floor. His Cobra was only a few feet in front of him. One good shot and he'd take out the lady cop for good. If he could hit the SUX's gas tank, there'd be barbecued bitch for dinner. Joe made a move for the gun. He heard a growling sound behind him. He turned and spun as the remaining guard dog leaped down from a pile of slag. The shepherd eyed Joe, saliva dribbling from its open mouth. Joe gawked at the dog. He wished he had finished both the mutts off in the foundry. The dog was upon him in a second, teeth bared, claws slashing. Numbed by now from the pain in his leg, Joe calmly watched as the rows of teeth tore into his arm and his neck. The remnants of the control booth still fluttered to the ground. The growling of the dog subsided. Officer Lewis lay, silent, behind the SUX. Soon there were only two beings in the plant left on their feet. A cyborg cop and a deranged killer. They faced each other calmly, awaiting the showdown between man and a machine that was beginning to feel like a man.